So we are here in Enon Valley, just a couple miles outside of East Palestine, over in Pennsylvania. I'm here with Hilary Flint. This is our first time meeting, so first off, thank you so much for taking the time. I've seen Hilary's name pop up all over the place. She's very involved with the Unity Council and is just one of many folks that we've been speaking to on our fourth reporting trip here back to the East Palestine area since the derailment and detonation of 5 cars of vinyl chloride back in February. So first off, I guess, would love to learn more about your personal situation with all of this. You know, how did you first hear about this, and you know, how has this affected you and your home here, a couple miles outside from where this happened?
Sure. So I live in Enon Valley, Pennsylvania, which is a part of Darlington Township. So I'm less than 5 miles from where the train derailed. And the night that it happened, I remember hearing a lot of sirens. And that's not typical. This town, we have under 300 people in my town. So, you know, when you're hearing a lot of sirens, you know something's going on. We turned on the news, didn't see anything. So then I pulled up Facebook. And that's when I saw some of the first images of the train derailed. So I know a lot of people that live in East Palestine. Obviously, it's right down the road. So a lot of the people that I know were affected, but I didn't know then that I would be affected. So there was a couple of days that went by, and we knew that there were chemicals, and we're slowly figuring things out. And that's when I started to worry. So I'm a cancer survivor. And when I heard some of the chemicals that were leaking, such as vinyl chloride, you know, I knew there was going to be an issue. So I remember the day of the open burn. That morning, I had my to-go bag ready. I'm a little bit of a prepper. So I had my to-go bag. I was ready to leave. My grandmother took a little convincing, but they'd actually, so I live on family land, to put it in perspective. My family moved here from Italy. I live in the house my great-grandmother built. And we had a farm, a tomato farm, you know, of course, the typical kind of Italian story. So we're 4th generation on my land, and my father built a home right behind us, and that's where my younger siblings were being raised. And I definitely knew that there was cause for concern when my little brother's school district was evacuated. They had early dismissal is what they called it, and I think that was sometime around 11 a.m. And I remember thinking, you know, oh, like, that's even further. Like, the school district is way further than our home. So I just thought, oh, we're evacuating the school to get kids with their families, and then the rest of us will be evacuated.
Right.
Well, that didn't happen. So my entire family did decide to self-evacuate. We stayed at hotels. My brother and my parents stayed a little closer to his hockey game that night, and then my grandmother and I stayed in a little bit further into Beaver County. And you know, they on the news are telling us, okay, it's safe to go home. So I'm thinking, you know, oh, okay, we'll just go home the next day. I had to fly out for work, so I had to get my bags and stuff anyway. And when we opened the door to our sunroom, that's when I knew that there was a huge problem. The smell was like a sweet bleach. And when I initially said that, it didn't make sense to me. And now, you know, I'm talking to all these different scientists and stuff, and they're saying, yeah, that's exactly it. But it just smelled like a chemical smell, but a little bit sweeter. And we didn't know how long it was going to last. We didn't know what to do. So we started, you know, making phone calls. There was a Norfolk Southern Assistance Center number at that time. We called the DEP. A lot of my neighbors were doing the same thing here in Enon. And we were all just told, oh, it couldn't affect you.
Right.
Like, it's just a coincidence. You know, months later now, I'm hearing a lot of my neighbors having the same exact story. So I'm like, okay, that's a crazy coincidence.
Right.
But we couldn't get answers. Right. So we had to figure it out for ourselves.
Right.
And I eventually thought that things would change. I thought, you know, someone would finally tell us what to do, or someone would, I don't want to say come to our rescue, but give us some guidance. And months in, that just didn't happen.
Right. And to be clear for folks too, so the what they were initially calling controlled burn, but we now know wasn't controlled and really didn't likely need to happen based on what we learned at the NTSB hearing back in June. That's where the actual owners of the vinyl chloride, the company that produced it, you know, went on the record saying that they told Norfolk Southern that they did not think that they needed to detonate these cars. There were other ways to clean this up that would have prevented this from affecting further away communities such as this. But that cloud during the controlled burn that many of you have seen, the giant plume of chemical toxic smoke, blew in many cases right over this community.
Yeah, so Pennsylvania was hit harder by the plume than Ohio. And there are plenty of different plume maps that all prove that. I have a lot of neighbors who have pictures of it just, enveloping their farms. We were very late to self-evacuate, and I remember driving through Chippewa, which is, even further away, and seeing the plume in my rearview mirror and thinking like, oh my goodness, like, that was the moment I thought, do we ever get to go home? That looks crazy. And yeah, there's people with photos of it at their farm, and still a Pennsylvania representative that represents a lot of the local communities said, just because you saw a black cloud go over your house doesn't mean that you've been affected. And that's the moment I realized it's not our local government's probably not going to be the one to help us, because they just don't even understand the depth of what happened. And not only did my house, continue to smell like that, that smell traveled with me. So I had mentioned I was going on a work trip right after. So I packed my bag and I was flying out to California, got off the plane, your normal pleasantries with your boss, a hug, oh, good to see you. And he goes, why do you smell like that? And at that point I was like, oh my goodness, like, did this come with me? And so when I finally opened up my suitcase, I was like, oh my God, it did.
Right, you packed your clothes.
And it still does. So 6 months later, I ended up getting a rental home, and I packed all my clothes and things like that, and I was just gonna take that up to the house first. And as soon as I unzipped the bag, there was the smell. And that was the moment I realized, I'm not just moving, I'm starting over. Because I've washed all those clothes many times. So how do you get that smell out? You don't.
Excuse me. To be clear as well, Norfolk Southern is not reimbursing anything for really anybody on the Pennsylvania side of things, from what I understand. Is that correct? Have you tried to reach out to them? Will they do anything?
Yeah, I've gone in plenty of circles with Norfolk Southern and different levels of Pennsylvania government. So initially, I had this smell, so I knew that I needed to get some testing. So that was my first kind of ask, is how do I get testing for my home? And that didn't exist for where I lived. And I was lucky enough to find a university. Wayne State University came out, and they did a lot of testing in PA. And they were one of the only universities who even considered us, which I really appreciate. But they came out, they did some testing, and they found vinyl chloride in the fire pit outside of my home. They had taken a sample of charcoal, because charcoal holds on to vinyl chloride, because it only has like a short half-life. So that was the only place they could have really found to prove that vinyl chloride was there. And then inside my home, I had an air purifier. And it looked crazy after the derailment. Like, I just had never seen so much dust on it. And overnight, it was caked in dust. So I'd said to them, like, here, like, will you be able to find anything on this? So they took the filter, and there they found ethyl hexoacrylate, which is likely the smell. So that air purifier filter was right next to my bed. And now that I have this proof, I think, okay, now I can maybe get some assistance. And I didn't. And I still to this day haven't. Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro was in Darlington Township for a small business resource fair. And, I'm always like, what about the people? What about the residents? Not all of us have a business, but we're still affected. So I went down there and I tried to talk to him. And he handed me this form, and it said small business loss claim sheet. And he said, here's how Pennsylvanians are getting help and getting financial assistance. And he said, yes, hundreds of Pennsylvanians are getting help through this. Like, yeah, you'll qualify. So I thought, okay, like, I was like, I even said to him, like, this doesn't look like it would help me. This isn't intuitive. He was like, just do it. Like, just, email that person. And so I did. And of course, it didn't work.
You're not a small business.
Yeah, it was some type of attorney from Norfolk Southern who was doing a lot of the small business claims. And so he referred me to the assistance center. And he had said to me, and first of all, when you call the assistance center, they ask for your address multiple times. So you're giving your address to all these different people, which I think is super weird. But I remember him saying, like, oh yeah, you don't qualify based on our map. And I said, okay, are there any Pennsylvanians that qualify? He goes, yeah, like, there's people in your community that qualify, just not your house. And I'd asked, how many households from Pennsylvania? And he said 8. So out of the thousands of people that live, my community's small, but we're part of Darlington Township, which is a couple thousand. There's South Beaver, which is probably another couple thousand. So out of all of that, 8 Pennsylvanian families.
I mean, and frankly, I'm trying to do the math in my head. I think I've spoken to 8 Pennsylvania families who really should have qualified for assistance. Obviously the state of Pennsylvania has more resources than I do to go talk to these people and find out that more than 8 people need the resources. I mean, 8 homes, correct me if I'm wrong, that might be like a couple homes that are on Taggart Street on the Pennsylvania side, and that's probably it.
Yeah, it's probably some homes just down this road, which is right before Taggart.
Okay.
So that seemed crazy. And so my next question was, how do we get that map expanded? And that was another rabbit hole that I went down that, one person would say it's the federal EPA, then it was Ohio EPA, then it was the Pennsylvania DEP, then it was PA EMS, and I still don't have a solid answer on who actually can do that.
Right.
And
when you ask any of them, they probably say, oh no, reach out to this
point.
person, reach out to this person, reach out to this person. And that's something that's true for folks in Pennsylvania, but even true for a lot of folks in East Palestine directly. I spoke with Shelby Walker yesterday. Her home is 900 feet from the derailment site. It's the construction cleanup is literally in her backyard.
Yep.
There were train cars leaning against her property fence. She, to this day, can't get the EPA to do a soil test in her backyard.
No, they will not. And so I had a meeting with Mark Durno and Jamie Wallace of Unity Council. And he even said to me, your results in PA were the first ones that made me go,
Right.
we should look into PA more. And he's, telling me all these things, and then nothing comes of it.
Right.
And he won't admit that, publicly, but what they say to you one-on-one always seems to be very different than what they say to the masses,
Right.
which has been a continued issue. But my point is, all you have to do is come out and smell my house.
Right.
Like, just come smell it. And then you can make a decision on what to do. But instead, they will. So I guess someone had brought up my test results to the EPA, and they said, oh, it's because of the ethyl hexyl acrylate is from her doing laundry in her home.
Right.
Now, here's the best part. I don't have laundry in my house. And they wouldn't know that because
Right.
they've never been to my house.
Right.
Because they won't. I think recently we've been seeing some success in getting the EPA to come out to people's homes. I haven't given a call yet. At this point, I'm just exhausted with
Right.
it. But, how do you make these broad assumptions without going into someone's house or even driving by someone's house?
Absolutely. I'm curious, did you or anyone in your family experience health symptoms when kind of coming back? I know you've kind of been in a mix of staying in the home, staying away from the home, just based on you can't afford to stay away from your home when Norfolk Southern is not reimbursing you for relocation. Did you or anyone in your family experience health symptoms?
Yeah.
And I guess, are you still experiencing any, I would say?
Definitely. So I just got back from Chicago, and immediately I have watery eyes again. I'm very congested, very tired. But initially, the first couple weeks were definitely the worst. It was nonstop diarrhea. It was horrible rashes. And they were happening after I would shower. So initially, I thought that it was the water.
Right.
Now, my water tests were fine. It wasn't until later I found out that it's actually the humidity. So if you had a chemical in your air and it got trapped into a surface, let's say curtains, rugs, what happens when humidity comes in, that off gases. So that's likely why I would be getting these rashes after showers. But I would just, be covered in red, itchy rashes. I would say the congestion was really some of the worst part of it. But a couple months in, myself, my partner, we all had horrible upper respiratory infections, which, of course, it's like, oh, that's bronchitis, or I tested negative for strep and COVID and all these things. So it's just been continued, I would say, symptoms of really bad allergies
Right.
is what I would say sticks with me. But the big one for me personally is I have endometriosis, and it's taken me years to get this disease under control. And what they had to do is put me on all these different hormones to completely stop menstruation. That's what helps it not spread in my body. And so I didn't menstruate in my life for well over 5 years. And since the train derailment, I am menstruating again. So to me, that says, this is very significantly affecting hormones.
Yeah.
And I can't get any answers for it. It's just, up your medicine, go on more, and I shouldn't have to do that. Someone should be remediating my home or relocating my family.
Right. Something else that we talked about a little bit before we got started here too, So you mentioned you're in the Unity Council. Unity Council just had a trip down to Washington, D.C. about 2 weeks ago. I'm curious to hear a little bit more about that trip. You met with several lawmakers. I'm curious how that went, if you had any successes. Big takeaways from that, because as you mentioned, trying to reach out to local officials hasn't really gotten you there. They don't understand the whole situation. We've seen on the news and whatnot, state officials also kind of running into issues. Specifically, I've seen a lot of it with Governor DeWine. Federal officials not doing a whole lot. The EPA not really answering a lot of questions, misleading a lot of folks. Straight up contradicting themselves in a lot of cases, lying in some cases. I'm curious how that trip went. Because it's been, unfortunately, you've needed to elevate it to this level that you need to go to Washington, D.C. to try to get these folks' attention.
Yeah, so I'm vice president of Unity Council, and I do a lot of our external relations. So government, working with other nonprofits, we are not a nonprofit, but working with nonprofits, other environmental grassroots groups. And we had gone to Columbus, a few months ago, and the ask there was we need a state of emergency or some type of disaster declaration. And it was on the very last minute that Governor DeWine finally did that.
Right.
So, I consider that a little bit of a success that he finally did it. I don't think he would have if we wouldn't have kept pushing.
Right. I actually want to ask you one question about that before you keep going here. So on that disaster declaration request that he sent in, one major red flag that stood out to me was, and I've been asking this to all the residents that I've been speaking with so far, it said on there that there are currently no unmet needs. I'll ask you first, are there unmet needs?
Yes, and that's why we went to D.C.
Okay.
So we were really happy that the request went in, and then we read it, and we go, no unmet needs. So we went to D.C. to tell people that we had unmet needs. And we met with, multiple different senators, some representatives, some very high-level EPA officials. And really our purpose was to go there and tell them about our unmet needs. So show them pictures, tell them stories, really give them some proof. And we did that. Some of the conversations were just us telling our stories. Some of the other conversations were a little bit more back and forth. For example, Senator Vance's office, we found out that one of his officials, staff members, when they came down here, got a nosebleed after being around the creeks and continued to get them. And so, some of them were more back and forth, like, how can we as government officials help you? Or like, what information do you need?
Right.
So we didn't meet with Bernie Sanders, but we met with his office, and they were very, very helpful in telling us, like, here's what you need to be looking at, and like the Affordable Care Act that might be able to help you. When it comes to transportation, here's what you should be looking into. So some of it was just, advocating for ourselves. Some of it was getting some feedback on that. And then our ask afterwards was for everyone to write a letter of support saying that there are unmet needs and that President Biden does need to sign this major disaster declaration. So since then, Senator Brown has wrote a letter, and J.D. Vance was just here, and he, I believe we're expecting a letter from his office, but he advocated for our needs and said, he's frustrated. He would like to see more indoor air testing. That was a big piece that we left D.C. realizing how important this indoor air testing is. Without it, East Palestine right now is considered a super fund. It's general, though. We're not on what they call, it's like a national registry list. Okay. And what we found out was that's scaled on a point system. And one of the things that gets you a lot of points is bad indoor air. So if they're not doing the testing, we're not able to go from just a general Superfund site to actually being on the registered list.
So that's the first I'm hearing about that. So that's definitely something I'm going to dig into. So that sounds like a reason, because I've been asking that question also for months of why is the EPA still standing behind the residential indoor air testing that they did back in February that,
they now admit that wasn't even good.
Well, they last week or a week and a half ago when I asked them in an email, they said that they disagree with Mark Durno's assessment that it wasn't good back then. So Mark Durno is an EPA official who at a town hall that was recorded on video came out and said, the devices that were being used for these residential air tests can't pick up butyl acrylate, one of the chemicals of concern, until it is 5 times higher than that level of concern. In our own research and speaking with chemists, toxicologists, Those devices can't pick up things like phosgene. They can only pick up things like formaldehyde if it has a special attachment on it. But if that special attachment is on it, you cannot pick up any of the other chemicals. Dr. Andrew Welton from Purdue University has compiled a list of, I think it's 5 or 6 different scientific research papers that all show the flaws with these photoionization detectors that are being used. And when I asked, it was 2 weeks ago at this point, in an email, the EPA, why is there not more indoor residential air testing done when clearly these are flawed? And I outlined all of those points. I included the video clip of Mark Durno saying so, and their response was that they disagree with those assessments and that they stand behind their testing.
So that, every person you talk to gives a different story. They change their stories. It continues to happen. But what we found out is it's a really important piece of this puzzle.
Yeah.
And if we're on that registry list, that opens the door to a lot of federal resources, such as Section 1881A, which would give us Medicare as people that were victims of an environmental disaster. Yeah, whatever you want to call it.
Well, that hopefully we do see a letter from Senator Vance and that air testing is specifically mentioned on there. That sounds positive that he is at least acknowledging that. That's kind of the first we're hearing about that. So.
Yeah. So he's been pushing for it. Senator Brown's team has as well, and I'm trying to get PA folks on board. But we can't wait. What we've learned through all of this is we can't wait for someone to do it for us. So Unity Council's next step immediately following that was, okay, how do we, if not, get the indoor air testing, how do we prove that that is a need? Mm-hmm. And so in the past couple weeks, this is what we've been working on, and soon we'll announce all the details, but we've worked with the Waste Station, which is a charity that operates in East Palestine, and they have obtained 35 indoor air monitors. And so we have given those to people, right around ground zero and within the village, and what we're seeing is very bad indoor air quality. Mm-hmm. Now, the EPA can obviously challenge a lot of that, but what we wanted to see was, when are there spikes? What homes are the worst? And we're comprising that data right now, but one thing that's been interesting is that almost everyone's air quality gets worse at night. So one of our questions as citizen scientists is, what's happening at night?
Right.
Are they doing more digging that we don't know of? Are they moving things? So we have 35 families right now with these indoor air monitors. And then this week I've obtained indoor air badges for 5 families in Pennsylvania. So that's actual indoor air testing. It tests overall VOCs, so it can't tell you exactly what is in your home, but it would be a good indicator. Right. And then we also are going to start working with a scientist that has what's called a PID. And again, it's not going to tell us exactly what chemicals are in someone's home, but it'll give us an idea of overall VOCs.
Right.
So if the EPA isn't going to do it, we're going to find a way.
Right.
So this is our first step into, what do we have to do as citizen scientists and as affected residents to push the EPA to do indoor air tests.
Right.
If we come out and we have all this data showing bad indoor air, they can fight against it, right, but they're going to lose the public relations battle for sure.
Right. And I mean, to be clear, they're already, especially in the area, they're losing the PR battle, at least locally for sure already. But getting it out to the masses is the next question, or is the next kind of step to this. And the thing that's always kind of driven me nuts about this one is it's not like the EPA does not have the resources to do indoor air testing. You would imagine that if that is a major concern that residents are highlighting, which it is, every resident that I talk to is concerned about indoor air testing. That's what they've been asking for. They're concerned about, do I still have chemicals in my home? The EPA has those resources. They are part of the federal government. If we have the resources to spend billions of dollars overseas, if we have the resources to spend, give billions of dollars in tax breaks to companies like Norfolk Southern and others, over the years, we can absolutely make sure that, we need to do another round of indoor air testing in a couple hundred homes even, not even if you have to do it everywhere, do a couple hundred homes. That is less than a drop in the bucket for an agency like the EPA,
so the question
but they
is,
refuse to do it.
Why wouldn't they?
And maybe it's exactly what you're saying here with this point system, and that's definitely something that I'd be curious to look into here more. So.
Yeah, and we're still working with everyone we met with to understand it more ourselves.
Yeah.
But yeah, my question is then why wouldn't you?
Right.
And on our second day in DC, we met with, in a very official room, it felt like I was in an episode of Scandal. We met with a lot of different EPA officials, and actually I would say third in charge of all EPA. His name is Dan Utek. He's the chief of staff. And there was a man, Cliff Villa, there, who's in charge of Superfunds and a few of their other resident scientists. And, we kept just asking, why wouldn't you do it? Why wouldn't you do it? And the couple things overall, we heard it's not our recommendation right now. That's why they're not doing it. So then, of course, the next question is why? And they said they have so many outdoor air data points that would tell them that they don't need to. And so my question was, but, if you haven't been in the homes, you don't know.
Right.
These chemicals get stuck in certain surfaces, soft surfaces, even wood. So anyone who has curtains, rugs, if someone has a window air conditioner, that's letting air seep in. Because one of the things I was told was, oh, well, this happened in the winter, so all the homes were closed off and they couldn't get in. But there's so many different ways that they could. In my home, we have a sunroom, which has a lot of different windows. It has skylights, which have known to leak in the past.
Right.
We're talking about there's ways that basements, the storm drains in the basement, the air could come up through there.
Not to mention that I've got we've published it in an article back in March, but we've got video from when Candace DeSanzo's home was being tested by CTEH with a member of the EPA there, and the recommendation was to open your windows.
Yes,
this was
and
on
that's what I was
February
told.
9th. Again, they were saying at that point that the air quality was fine, which blows my mind. But if they're saying, all the homes were shut up, well, no, actually, you all were telling people to do the opposite of that, like just days after the massive controlled burn.
Yeah. So the only help the only help that the EPA has, given me was when Wayne State went to them and said, like, here are the test results. This is in our house. The EPA said, well, what she can do is take anything that's a soft surface outside of her home and you let it on a very hot sunny day and you let it off gas in the sun, and it'll get all the chemicals out of the mattress, out of the rugs, and then you leave all the windows open and you just let air flow through for about 24 hours.
Right.
And, my initial question was, who is carrying every item in my home outside?
Right.
And we live in a place where the weather is unpredictable,
right.
So you never know what's a sunny day versus a rainy day. And then are we testing my items once we get them back in my house?
Right.
No, we're not.
Right.
So you're just hoping that the sun will off-gas every chemical in my mattress outside that apparently I have to drag with my 80-year-old grandmother. It made no sense. So they contradict themselves. Oh, nothing can be trapped inside, but then the same advice they give you is to take your stuff outside to off-gas in the sun. It makes no sense.
No, it doesn't at all. I want to say thank you so much for taking the time and chatting with us. If there's anything else you want to hit on, feel free right now to go for it. But otherwise, seriously, thank you so much for taking your time. Definitely, let's continue to stay in touch. Keep it up, because unfortunately, as we've seen, these agencies, like you said earlier, no one's coming to help. There's no hero coming to save the day, to answer all the questions, to advocate on your behalf. The only reason this is able to continue going is because folks like yourself are still out there day in and day out continuing to push there. So if you do have anything else you want to share, feel free. I don't want to pull it away from you, but
yeah, thank you. And I will say this has turned a lot of people in this area now are looking at other things that we've been told are safe.
Right.
And the one thing about Pennsylvanians right now is we're really trapped between what happened in East Palestine and then we have this Shell plastics plant. So that plastics plant's only, I would say, about 15 miles from my home. East Palestine's less than 5 miles. When the controlled burn happened, there was actually a malfunction at the plastics plant. So they were flaring and they were releasing things like benzene into the air. And so Pennsylvanians really got screwed. We have the plume coming this way, and then we have the Shell plastics plant flaring going this way. And no one's talking about what that, that's a toxic burden that's worse than anyone's even realizing. And no one's really looking at that, the people in between those two things that happen in the same amount of time.
Right.
And so Pennsylvanians are really being forgotten about. And as a Pennsylvanian, that's what I'm trying to do, is remind everyone that it's not just about, the plume. There are other sources of pollution that we're being affected by every day.
Right. And that's something that unfortunately is happening in other parts of the country as well, where they think folks are, they're not going to raise a stink about this. They're not worried about it. They're not even going to notice, blah, 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 blah. Excuse me. And unfortunately, you end up with situations like that. You end up with situations like my colleague Jordan covered in Kalamazoo, Michigan, where they've got a paper plant doing the same thing. Essentially, you know, all of the fumes from that going and poisoning a low-income neighborhood in Kalamazoo. So these are issues that, you know, you might not think that this could affect you in the future and that you don't need to care about these sorts of things. But if these companies are able to get away with what's going on here, it's going to be that much easier for them to continue to get away with it in, you know, insert your small town here across the United States.
And that's why we won't give up, and that's why we'll keep advocating just for the environment and health and safety, things that I thought there were organizations in place to take care of that. There's not. So it's up to us, and, you know, we'll keep going no matter how long we have to.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Hilary.
Thank you.